Corporal Finley Brennan adjusted the shoulder strap of her communications pack and tried to ignore the weight of 12 sets of eyes boring into her back. The pre-mission briefing tent smelled of canvas, gun oil, and the particular brand of skepticism that came with being the youngest person in the room by half a decade and the only one wearing a communications specialist designation instead of an operator badge. Lieutenant Wade Garrison stood at the front of the assembled SEAL team, his jaw tight as he stabbed a finger at the topographical map spread across the tactical table. The mission objective sat deep in hostile territory. A compound intelligence suggested housed high-value targets coordinating attacks against coalition forces. Standard direct action raid, in and out before dawn, except for one detail that had Garrison's neck veins standing out like bridge cables. Higher command had assigned Finley to the team. She kept her gaze steady on the map, noting sight lines and elevation changes with the automatic precision her father had drilled into her since she was tall enough to hold a rifle steady. The ridge system surrounding the compound offered perfect overwatch positions, natural cover, clean lines of fire across the entire valley. Her fingers twitched slightly, muscle memory cataloging distances and wind compensation before she caught herself and forced her hand still. Petty Officer Hayes Whitlock leaned back in his folding chair with exaggerated casualness, his voice carrying the particular edge of someone who wanted everyone to hear his opinion. "So we're babysitting now, LT? What's next? Bring your daughter to work day." The snickers that rippled through the tent made Finley's shoulders tense, but she kept her expression neutral. She had heard worse during her 3 years in the Navy, had learned that responding only made it worse. Let them think she was fragile. Let them think she needed protection. It was easier than the alternative. Master Chief Vernon Kahale shifted his considerable bulk in the corner, his weathered face unreadable in the tent's harsh lighting. The veteran SEAL had been watching Finley since she arrived at the forward operating base 2 days ago, his dark eyes tracking her movements with an intensity that made her nervous for reasons she could not quite name. He said nothing now, but his silence felt heavier than Whitlock's mockery. Garrison continued the briefing as if Whitlock had not spoken, but the damage was done. The team's attention had shifted from the mission to the unwanted addition in their midst. Staff Sergeant Iris Holbrook, the unit's medical specialist, shot Finley a sympathetic glance that somehow made everything worse. Sympathy meant they saw her as a victim, someone who needed defending rather than someone who could hold her own. Before we dive into this mission, Finley thought about all the people back home who would never understand what happened out here in the dark places of the world. Drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you have military bases in your area, or know veterans who have served, the communities that held their breath every time a deployment was announced and exhaled only when boots hit home soil again. The briefing continued with tactical details and contingency plans. Insertion via Helicopter 5, clicks from the objective, movement under cover of darkness, establish perimeter security while the assault element cleared the compound. Finley's role was simple, almost insultingly so. Monitor communications, maintain contact with command, stay out of the way while the real operators did their jobs. Garrison assigned positions with mechanical efficiency. Whitlock on point, Holbrook with the assault element, Master Chief Kahale anchoring the security perimeter. When he reached Finley's name on the roster, he paused long enough that the silence became uncomfortable. "Brennan, you will establish position on the northern ridge," he said finally, his tone suggesting he was reading from a script written by someone else. "Maintain communications protocol and provide situational updates every 15 minutes. Do not, under any circumstances, leave your assigned position without direct orders. Are we clear?" "Crystal clear, sir," Finley replied, her voice steady despite the heat crawling up her neck. The rest of the briefing passed in a blur of call signs and radio frequencies, extraction protocols, and ammunition counts. Finley copied everything into her tactical notebook with careful precision, aware that any mistake would be magnified, any error used as evidence that she did not belong. The team filed out of the tent in small groups, voices low as they discussed final preparations. Master Chief Kahale lingered after the others had gone, his presence filling the tent like a physical force. He moved to the tactical table and studied the map with the same intensity Finley had noticed earlier, his thick fingers tracing the ridge line where she would be positioned. "That scope case you carry," he said without looking up, his voice like gravel sliding down a mountain. "Custom leather work, old style. Do not see much of that anymore." Finley's hand moved instinctively to the battered case strapped to her pack, the leather worn smooth by decades of handling. "It was my father's," she said quietly. Kahale nodded slowly, still studying the map. "Your father was Jacob Brennan." It was not a question. Finley felt her breath catch in her throat, felt the familiar weight of legacy settle across her shoulders like a physical burden. "Yes, Master Chief." He finally looked up, his eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her want to step back. "I served with your father on 3 deployments. Watched him make shots that should not have been possible. Saw him save more lives than I can count. He was the best sniper I ever knew, and I have known plenty." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication and expectation. Finley did not know what to say, did not know how to explain that being Jacob Brennan's daughter was both her greatest pride and her deepest burden, that she had spent her entire life learning to shoot, training until her body moved with automatic precision, only to hide those skills behind a communications specialist badge because living in his shadow hurt less than trying to fill his shoes. Kahale studied her for another long moment before speaking again, his voice dropping lower. "The ridge position Garrison assigned you as clean sight lines across the entire valley, elevation advantage, natural wind breaks. Someone who knew what they were looking for would call it a perfect sniper nest. It is a good communications position," Finley replied carefully, the practice deflection coming automatically after years of hiding her capabilities. The Master Chief's knowing look suggested he saw right through her careful words, but he simply nodded and turned toward the tent exit. "Your father used to say the hardest shot is not the one you take, it is the one you choose not to take." He paused in the doorway, his broad shoulders blocking the fading daylight. Sometimes the right choice is knowing when to pull the trigger. Then he was gone, leaving Finley alone with the tactical map and the weight of his words. She moved to the table and traced the route they would take, her mind automatically calculating distances and angles, wind speeds, and bullet drop. The compound sat in a natural bowl surrounded by hills, a defensive position that would make direct assault costly. But from a northern ridge where Garrison had positioned her, almost every inch of the valley was exposed. The helicopter insertion went smoothly, rotors beating the thin mountain air as they flew nap of earth through the darkness. Finley sat wedged between equipment crates, her communications pack-heavy against her spine and her father's scope case pressed against her ribs like a talisman. Across from her, Whitlock cleaned his rifle with exaggerated care, making sure she saw every practiced movement. "Try not to trip over your own boots up there, Brennan," he said over the engine noise, his grin sharp in the red interior lighting. "Would hate for you to roll down the mountain and compromise the entire operation." Staff Sergeant Holbrook elbowed him hard in the ribs, her expression disapproving, but the damage was done. Several other team members chuckled, the sound lost in the helicopter's roar, but their body language clear enough. Finley kept her eyes on her equipment, checking connections and frequencies she had already verified 3 times. The landing zone was a flat stretch of rocky ground 5 kilometers from the objective, far enough to avoid detection, but close enough for rapid movement. The team moved out in tactical formation the moment boots hit dirt, Whitlock on point with his rifle up and ready, the rest of the element flowing behind him like water, finding its natural course. Finley took her position near the rear of the column, her communications equipment making her footsteps slightly heavier than the others. Master Chief Kahale materialized beside her in the darkness, his movements silent despite his size. The terrain was brutal, steep inclines and loose scree that threatened to slide away with every step. Above them, stars wheeled in a sky so clear and cold it felt like you could reach up and touch the void itself. They moved for 2 hours without speaking hand signals, and practice coordination, making words unnecessary. Finley found herself cataloging details automatically. The way shadows fell across potential firing positions, how wind patterns shifted with elevation changes, where enemy observers would logically set up if they were smart. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, patient lessons delivered on countless ranges and hillsides. Read the terrain, Finley girl, let it tell you where the shots are hiding. The team reached the split point as false dawn began touching the eastern horizon. Lieutenant Garrison gathered them in a shallow depression, his face grim in the growing light. From here, the assault element would continue to the compound while security positions dispersed to their assigned locations. Finley's Ridge was another kilometer north, a steep climb that would leave her isolated from the main team. Garrison pointed at the elevation rising behind them. "Brennan, that is your position. You have 30 minutes to get in place and establish communications. Once you confirm ready status, we move on the objective." He fixed her with a flat stare. "You stay on that ridge no matter what happens down here. Your job is communications, not heroics. Understood?" "Understood, sir," Finley replied, her voice steady. Whitlock smirked. "At least she will have a good view when things get interesting." The team dispersed to their positions, leaving Finley to begin her solitary climb. The ridge was steeper than the map suggested, loose rock and scrub brush, making every step treacherous in the dim light. Her communications pack seemed to grow heavier with each meter of elevation, straps cutting into her shoulders despite careful adjustment. But her father's scope case remained exactly where she needed it, balanced and secure against her body. She reached the ridge top as full dawn broke across the valley, golden light spilling down the slopes and illuminating the compound below. From this height, she could see everything, the entire tactical picture laid out like a training diorama. The compound was larger than intelligence had suggested, multiple buildings arranged in a defensive cluster with clear fields of fire between them. Guard towers at each corner, heavy weapons positions covering the approaches, a level of fortification that spoke to serious occupants with serious resources. Finley set up her communications equipment with practiced efficiency, unfolding the antenna array and running frequency checks. Her position was perfect, tucked into a natural depression in the rocks, with cover from above and clear visibility below. As she worked, her eyes kept returning to the valley, to the way shadows created dead zones where attackers could hide, to the exposed areas where defenders would have overwhelming advantage. Her hand moved to her father's scope case almost unconsciously, fingers tracing the worn leather. Inside was a Schmidt and Bender scope that had seen 3 wars and more missions than she could count. Glass, so perfectly calibrated that her father used to joke it could see tomorrow if you looked hard enough. She had not mounted it on a rifle since his funeral, had told herself she was honoring his memory by keeping it safe rather than using it. Communications check. Garrison's voice crackled in her earpiece. "All positions report." One by one the team called in, voices calm and professional. When her turn came, Finley kept her tone neutral. "Overwatch in position, communications green, visual on objective. Maintain radio discipline and standby," Garrison replied. "Assault element moving to final position." Finley watched through her spotting scope as the team ghosted through the valley below, moving with the fluid coordination of operators who had trained together for years. They were good, she had to admit, their movement disciplined and their spacing perfect. But as they approached the compound, she saw something that made her breath catch in her throat. Movement on the ridge opposite her position, barely visible in the morning shadows. Then more movement to the east and south. Not random patrols, but coordinated positions. Fighters spreading out in a pattern that would create a perfect kill zone once the assault element was committed. The compound was not just fortified, it was the bait in a carefully prepared trap. Finley keyed her radio with hands that wanted to shake, but held steady through sheer force of will. "Overwatch to Assault Actual, I have multiple contacts establishing positions on surrounding ridges, possible ambush in progress." Static crackled in her earpiece for 3 heartbeats before Garrison's voice came back. Irritation clear, even through the compressed transmission. Brennan, maintain radio discipline. We have thermals on the compound. No significant activity detected. Sir, I have visual confirmation of at least 15 combatants moving into flanking positions. The contacts are outside your thermal range, but they're coordinating for Brennan. Garrison cut her off, his voice hard as iron. Unless you have enemy forces actively engaging, keep the channel clear. We're going in. Finley watched helplessly as the assault element continued their approach, blind to the trap closing around them. She could see it all from her elevated position. The way enemy fighters were positioned to create overlapping fields of fire, how they held discipline and stayed low to avoid detection. The coordinated timing that spoke to professional military training rather than irregular fighters. This was not a random compound. It was a carefully prepared kill zone waiting for exactly this kind of raid. Her training screamed to her to do something, but what could she do? She was a communications specialist with no authority to call off the mission, no credibility with a team that saw her as deadweight. Her hand moved to her father's scope case again, fingers trembling against the leather as calculations ran through her mind automatically. Distances, wind speeds, angles of fire. From this position, she could reach most of the enemy positions, could eliminate the ambush before it was sprung, but that would mean revealing everything she had spent 3 years hiding. The assault element reached the compound wall just as the sun cleared the eastern peaks, golden light flooding the valley and eliminating the last shadows that had concealed their approach. For one perfect moment, everything was still, the calm before the storm that every combat veteran recognized in their bones. Then the world exploded into violence. The ambush was sprung with devastating precision. Heavy machine gun fire erupted from the ridges simultaneously, tracer rounds drawing deadly lines through the morning air. The compound walls that had appeared solid were revealed as false fronts, dropping away to expose prepared fighting positions with interlocking fields of fire. The SEAL team was caught in the open, pinned down with nowhere to run and limited cover. Contact, 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 multiple positions. Garrison's voice filled the radio, his professional calm cracking under the stress of sudden, catastrophic engagement. We are taking heavy fire from all sides. Request immediate air support. Finley watched through her spotting scope as the team scrambled for what cover existed, their coordinated movement dissolving into desperate survival. She could see Whitlock dragging a wounded operator behind a low wall, could see Staff Sergeant Holbrook trying to return fire while shells chewed up the ground around her position, could see Master Chief Kahale laying down suppressing fire that was completely inadequate against the volume of incoming rounds. Her radio came alive with overlapping transmissions, voices tight with adrenaline and fear. Man down, we need medevac. Enemy positions on the northern ridge, estimate 20-plus fighters. Air support is 15 minutes out. We cannot hold for 15 minutes. Lieutenant Garrison tried to organize a fighting withdrawal, but enemy fire intensified every time anyone moved. They were trapped, pure and simple, caught in a kill zone designed by someone who understood exactly how American special operations worked and how to counter them. The compound had never been the objective. The Americans themselves were the target, and they had walked right into it. Finley felt her heartbeat slow, even as chaos raged below, felt the familiar calm settle over her like a physical presence. This was the moment her father had trained her for, had prepared her for through thousands of hours on ranges and hillsides. She had hidden her skills to avoid his shadow, to forge her own identity separate from his legend. But watching her team die when she had the ability to save them was not honor, it was cowardice. Her hands moved with automatic precision, reaching for her father's scope case. The leather was warm from being pressed against her body during the climb, familiar and solid in her grip. She pulled out the Schmidt and Bender scope, the glass catching the morning light, and began mounting it to her rifle with movements practiced until they were muscle memory. Brennan, what is your status? Do you have communications with command? Garrison's voice was tight with desperation now, the professional veneer stripped away by the reality of impending death. Finley adjusted the scope mounting with micro-precise movements, checking alignment and eye relief. Below her, the volume of fire was increasing, enemy fighters growing bold as they realized the Americans had no effective counter to their ambush. She could see a heavy machine gun position being moved to a spot that would have direct fire on the team's main defensive cluster, could see fighters massing for an assault that would overrun the weakened Americans in minutes. "Communications are up, sir," Finley replied, her voice utterly calm. "Air support is 12 minutes out. You need to hold your position." "We cannot hold for 12 minutes, Garrison shot back. "We're getting cut to pieces here. Half the team is down. Ammunition is critical. We need options now." Finley settled into her shooting position, body conforming to the rocky ground with practiced ease. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Calm instructions delivered on a Colorado range a lifetime ago. "Breathing is everything. Finley girl, let your body find its natural rhythm and shoot in the pause between heartbeats." She ranged the closest enemy position with her scope, reading wind indicators and calculating adjustments automatically. "Sir, I need you to trust me," she said quietly into her radio. "When I tell you, push everyone behind the north wall and stay down for 60 seconds. Do not ask questions, just do it." There was a long pause filled with gunfire and screaming. Then Garrison's voice came back, stripped of its earlier dismissiveness and filled instead with the desperate hope of a commander with no other options. "Copy that, Brennan. Waiting for your signal." Finley chambered around and felt a rifle settle against her shoulder like it had been made for this exact purpose. 1,200 meters to the first target, a machine gunner whose position dominated the entire valley floor. Crosswind at 8 kilometers per hour from the west. Temperature rising as the sun climbed higher. Elevation advantage of 400 meters requiring compensation for bullet drop over distance. Her breathing slowed to the rhythm her father had taught her, deep and controlled, finding that perfect pause between heartbeats where the body went completely still. Through the scope, she could see the machine gunner's face, could see him adjusting his weapon to rake across the American position again, could see the exact moment when his world would end and he would never understand why. "All positions, get behind the north wall now," Finley said in her radio, her voice carrying the absolute calm of someone who knew exactly what came next. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle's recoil was familiar as breathing, the scope coming back down to reveal the machine gunner collapsing over his weapon 1,200 meters away. The sound of the shot would take 3.5 seconds to reach the valley floor, by which time she was already transitioning to her second target. A spotter positioned on the eastern ridge, range 1,300 meters, adjusting for the increased crosswind at that angle. Second shot, second target down. The enemy fighters were still reacting to the first kill when their spotter dropped without warning, confusion rippling through their coordinated assault. Finley was already moving to target 3, a commander type directing fighters from a protected position on the southern slope. Harder shot, 1,400 meters through a gap in the rocks barely wider than a dinner plate, accounting for the bullet's arc over that distance. The commander went down, and suddenly the coordinated ambush began falling apart. Enemy fighters started looking around instead of at their targets, trying to identify where death was coming from in the clear morning air. Finley methodically worked through her target priority list, each shot planned 3 moves ahead like a chess master, seeing the entire board. "What the hell is happening out there?" Garrison's voice came through the radio, equal parts confusion and desperate hope. "The fire is slacking off." Who is providing support? Finley did not answer, could not spare the attention for explanations when there were still 8 priority targets and ammunition was finite. She dropped a fighter, moving a rocket-propelled grenade launcher into position, then his loader, then a squad leader trying to rally his scattered troops. Each shot was perfect, each kill at ranges that stretched the absolute limits of the rifle and scope combination, each impact proving that her father's training had been absorbed into her very bones. The enemy force was breaking now, their tactical advantage evaporating as invisible death picked off anyone who tried to coordinate a response. Finley could see them pointing at the ridges, trying to locate the sniper who was destroying their carefully planned ambush. She shifted position slightly, moving 3 meters to her right before resuming fire, the old sniper wisdom about never shooting from the same place twice proving its worth once again. Staff Sergeant Holbrook's voice came through the radio, breathless and amazed. Someone is hitting them from extreme range, precision shots? This is not close air support. This is something else entirely. The SEAL team was recovering now, using the respite to consolidate their position and treat their wounded. Finley could see Master Chief Kahale staring up at the northern ridge, his weathered face turned toward her position even though she knew he could not possibly see her from that distance. But somehow she felt his gaze anyway, felt him understanding what was happening even as the rest of the team remained confused. "Brennan," Garrison called out, his voice carrying a new edge of urgency. "Brennan, report your status." "Status is green," Finley replied calmly. Settling her scope on an enemy fighter, tried to use a radio to call for reinforcements. She fired and the radio exploded in the fighter's hands 1,400 meters away. "Enemy force is disrupted. Continue consolidating your position." She worked through the remaining priority targets with mechanical efficiency, each shot reducing the enemy's ability to coordinate and fight back. The volume of fire directed at the SEAL team had dropped from overwhelming to sporadic, and what remained was poorly aimed and desperate. The ambush had been turned on its head, the hunters becoming the hunted by an enemy they could not see or counter. Petty Officer Whitlock's voice came through clearly now, the cocky edge replaced by something like awe. "Whoever is shooting needs to teach a class, because those are impossible shots." Finley allowed herself the smallest smile as she dropped another target, this one trying to organize a withdrawal. Her ammunition was running low now, down to her last magazine, but the enemy force was shattered beyond recovery. They were abandoning their positions and fleeing into the surrounding mountains, leaving behind their dead and their carefully prepared ambush site. "All positions, the enemy is withdrawing." Garrison's voice carried relief, so profound it was almost painful to hear. "Consolidate casualties and prepare for extraction. Air support is inbound in 6 minutes." The SEAL team moved with renewed purpose, the professionals reasserting themselves now that immediate death was no longer hovering overhead. Finley watched them work, saw Holbrook treating wounded with steady hands, saw Whitlock and others establishing a defensive perimeter that would hold until the helicopters arrived. Master Chief Kahale was still looking toward a ridge, and as she watched through her scope, he raised one hand in a slow, deliberate gesture that might have been acknowledgement or respect or simply recognition. "Overwatch, this is Assault Actual." Garrison's voice was different now, stripped of condescension and filled instead with something harder to define. "We are securing the landing zone for extraction. What is your status for movement to pickup point?" Finley began breaking down her position, securing her rifle and carefully returning her father's scope to its case. The Schmidt and Bender glass had performed flawlessly, just as it had through 3 wars and countless missions under her father's hands. She had been afraid that using it would feel like desecration, like she was trying to wear his legacy without earning it. Instead, it felt like connection, like he was there beside her on that rocky ridge, guiding her hands and steadying her breath. "Overwatch is mobile. Estimate 20 minutes to reach your position," she replied, slinging her communications pack and starting the careful descent from the ridge. The climb down was faster than the climb up, but no less treacherous, loose rock threatening to slide away under her boots with each step. The sun was fully up now, the valley floor bright and clear, the bodies of enemy fighters scattered across positions that should have been their victory. She had saved 12 lives this morning with 18 shots, had turned certain death into survival with skills she had spent 3 years pretending she did not possess. As she descended, Finley wondered what would happen next, how the team would react when they realized that the impossible shots had come from the communications specialist they had dismissed as deadweight. The landing zone was organized chaos when Finley arrived, casualties being stabilized for transport while the perimeter security scanned for any remaining threats. The smell of cordite and blood hung heavy in the morning air, mixing with the dust kicked up by nervous boots and the distant sound of incoming helicopters. 4 team members were wounded, 2 seriously, but all were alive. Without her intervention, none of them would have made it out. Lieutenant Garrison stood near the center of the defensive position, coordinating with air support through his radio while simultaneously directing the casualty evacuation plan. His tactical vest was scorched from a near miss, his face streaked with dirt and sweat, but his voice remained steady and professional. He looked up as Finley approached, his expression shifting through several emotions too quickly to identify before settling on something between confusion and calculation. "Brennan," he said, gesturing for her to approach. "We need to debrief what happened up on that ridge." Before Finley could respond, Petty Officer Whitlock limped over, favoring his left leg where shrapnel had torn through his pants but apparently missed anything vital. His earlier cockiness had been replaced by something more genuine, his eyes sharp as he studied her with new intensity. "The sniper fire that saved us came from the northern ridge," he said bluntly. "From your position, Brennan. Want to explain how a communications specialist pulled off shots that our actual snipers could not make?" Staff Sergeant Holbrook joined them, her medical gloves stained red, but her patient stabilized and ready for transport. She looked at Finley with open curiosity mixed with respect. "I counted at least 15 confirmed kills at extreme range," she said quietly. "Some of those shots were over 1,400 meters in difficult conditions. That is not amateur work. That is world-class marksmanship." The rest of the team was gathering now, drawn by the conversation like iron filings to a magnet. They formed a loose semicircle around Finley, their faces showing everything from suspicion to awe to angry confusion. These were operators who prided themselves on their skills, who had trained for years to reach elite status, and suddenly the person they had dismissed as deadweight had demonstrated abilities that exceeded their own. Master Chief Kahale pushed through the circle, his massive presence creating space where there had been none. His weathered face was unreadable, but his eyes locked on a Finley with absolute focus. "Show them the scope," he said, his voice carrying the weight of command despite it being phrased as a request. Finley felt every I turned toward her, felt the weight of revelation pressing down like a physical force. Her hand moved to the battered leather case at her side, fingers trembling slightly as she opened it and withdrew her father's scope. The Schmidt and Bender glass caught the morning light, its surface marked with the scratches and wear of decades of hard use. Engraved on the mounting ring in precise letters was a name that made several of the team members inhale sharply. Jacob Brennan. Master Chief Kahale's voice filled the sudden silence, steady and sure. "Jacob Brennan was the finest sniper the team's ever produced," he said, his eyes never leaving Finley's face. 3 tours, over 200 confirmed kills, shots that became legend. He saved my life in Helmand Province with a kill at 1,800 meters in a sandstorm. Impossible conditions, impossible shot, but Jacob made it look easy because he had been training for it his entire life. Garrison stared at the scope, then at Finley, his tactical mind visibly working through implications. "You are Jacob Brennan's daughter," he said slowly, "and you have been hiding the fact that you can shoot." Finley met his gaze steadily, finding her voice despite the tightness in her chest. "I have been shooting since I was 6 years old," she said quietly. "My father trained me on every range and hillside he could find. By the time I was 16, I could match his scores on qualification courses. By 18, I was exceeding them. But everyone who knew my father expected me to be him, to fill his shoes and carry his legacy. I joined as a communications specialist because I wanted to be my own person, not just Jacob Brennan's daughter." Whitlock shook his head slowly, a rueful smile crossing his face despite the tension. "So while we were giving you grief about babysitting radios, you could have outshot any of us on our best day." "Probably," Finley admitted, allowing herself a small smile. "But I was not trying to prove anything. I just wanted to do my job without the weight of expectations." Holbrook stepped forward, her medical training making her focus on practical matters. "Why reveal yourself now? You could have maintained your cover, Let us think the support came from somewhere else. Finley looked around at the wounded team members, at the blood soaking into the rocky ground, at the faces of operators who had been minutes from death. Because 12 lives were more important than my comfort, she said simply. Because watching you die when I had the ability to save you would have dishonored everything my father taught me. He always said the hardest shot is the one you choose not to take. And I finally understand what he meant. Master Chief Kahale nodded slowly, something like approval crossing his weathered features. Your father would be proud of what you did today, he said. Not because you can shoot like him, but because you made the hard choice when it mattered. That is the real legacy, knowing when to act regardless of personal cost. The sound of helicopters grew louder as the extraction birds approached, their rotors beating the air like mechanical thunder. Garrison held up a hand, silencing the team before the noise became overwhelming. We will finish this conversation once we are back at base, he said, his voice carrying a note of finality. But Brennan, you saved this team today. Whatever else happens, that is not forgotten. The helicopters landed in clouds of dust and debris, medical personnel rushing forward to load the wounded while the rest of the team provided security. Finley moved to help with the casualties, falling into the rhythm of controlled chaos that defined combat operations. But she felt the eyes on her back, felt the team's perception shifting from dismissal to something entirely different. As they loaded into the helicopters for extraction, Master Chief Kahale settled into the seat beside her, his bulk making the space feel smaller. He leaned close so his voice would carry over the engine noise. I knew your father for 15 years, served with him on 3 continents, watched him make shots that defied physics and logic. But the thing that made him legendary was not his shooting, it was his judgment. He never took a life without purpose, never pulled the trigger without being absolutely certain it was necessary. He paused, his dark eyes searching her face. You have his skills, Corporal Brennan, but more importantly, you have his judgment. That is what makes you dangerous, and that is what makes you valuable. The teams need people who can shoot, but we need people who know when to shoot even more. The helicopter lifted off, the valley falling away beneath them as they climbed towards safety. Finley looked down at the compound that had nearly been their grave, at the scattered enemy positions her shots had neutralized, at the rocky ridge where she had finally stopped running from her father's shadow. The forward operating base was a hive of activity when they landed, medical personnel rushing to meet the helicopters while intelligence officers waited to debrief the team on what had gone wrong with their mission planning. Finley helped unload the wounded, her communications equipment feeling lighter now that the weight of her secret had been lifted. The base hospital swallowed up Holbrook and the casualties, leaving the rest of the team to face the inevitable after-action review. Commander Patricia Vance stood waiting near the operations center, her arms crossed and her expression grim. She was a 20-year veteran who had come up through the intelligence side, her reputation built on meticulous planning and zero tolerance for surprises. The fact that her carefully planned raid had turned into a near massacre would not sit well, and someone would need to explain exactly what had happened out there. Garrison gathered the team in the operations center briefing room, the same space where they had received their mission orders less than 12 hours earlier. The tactical map still showed the compound, but now it was marked with red indicators showing enemy positions that intelligence had completely missed. The ambush had been textured and layered, professional military planning rather than irregular fighters defending territory. Commander Vance stood at the head of the table, her jaw tight as she studied each team member in turn. Her gaze lingered on Finley longer than the others, sharp eyes taking in details that most people would miss. I have read Lieutenant Garrison's preliminary report, she said, her voice carrying the controlled edge of someone working hard to maintain professional composure. What I am hearing suggests our intelligence was catastrophically wrong and only luck prevented total loss of the team. Not luck, ma'am, Master Chief Kahale said quietly. Skill. Vance's eyes snapped to him. Explain. Kahale gestured toward Finley. Corporal Brennan provided precision sniper fire from Overwatch position that neutralized the ambush before it could be fully executed. 15 confirmed kills at extreme range, some exceeding 1,400 meters in less than ideal conditions. Without her intervention, the entire team would have been killed or captured. Commander Vance's expression shifted subtly, professional interest replacing irritation. Corporal Brennan is listed as a communication specialist, she said carefully. Her service record makes no mention of sniper qualification or advanced marksmanship training. That is because I never formally qualified, Finley said, finding her voice despite the attention focused on her. I trained privately with my father from childhood. He taught me everything he knew about long-range shooting, but I chose not to pursue it professionally. Vance's eyes narrowed. Your father being Jacob Brennan, whose service record I am familiar with. She paused, processing implications. You chose to hide world-class marksmanship abilities and serve as a communications specialist instead. It seemed easier than living in his shadow, Finley replied quietly. Every range I went to, every unit I considered, people knew his name and expected me to be him. I wanted to build my own career, my own reputation, without constant comparison to a legend. The room was silent for a long moment, the weight of her words settling over the assembled operators. Lieutenant Garrison shifted uncomfortably, clearly remembering every dismissive comment and condescending order he had given over the past weeks. Whitlock stared at his hands, his cocky demeanor completely absent. Commander Vance walked to the tactical map and studied the marked enemy positions. Walk me through your engagement, she said to Finley. Start with when you first identified the ambush, and end with your final shot. Finley moved to the map, her mind replaying the morning's events with crystal clarity. I identified enemy fighters moving into position approximately 15 minutes before the assault element reached the compound. She began, pointing to the ridge lines. Their movement was coordinated and disciplined, professional military rather than irregular fighters. I reported to Lieutenant Garrison, but my assessment was dismissed. Garrison's face reddened, but he said nothing, letting her continue. When the ambush was sprung, I made the decision to engage with my personal rifle in scope, Finley continued. First target was the machine gun position here, range 1,200 meters, which was creating the most immediate threat to the team's survival. Subsequent targets were prioritized based on tactical impact, eliminating spotters, squad leaders, and heavy weapons operators first. She traced the pattern of her engagement across the map, showing how each shot had degraded the enemy's ability to coordinate and maintain the ambush. Commander Vance listened without interrupting, her expression growing more focused with each detail. When Finley finished, the commander stood silent for a moment, clearly running calculations through her tactical mind. 15 kills, 18 shots total, Vance said slowly. That is an 83% hit rate at extreme range under combat conditions. That exceeds the performance standards of our qualified sniper teams by a significant margin. My father used to say that any shot you take without absolute certainty is a waste of ammunition and possibly lives, Finley replied. He taught me to only shoot when I knew the bullet would go exactly where I intended. Vance turned to Garrison. Lieutenant, your preliminary report recommended disciplinary action for Corporal Brennan failing to disclose relevant skills. Do you still hold that recommendation? Garrison met the commander's eyes, then looked at Finley. His expression was complex, pride and embarrassment warring across his features. No, ma'am, he said quietly. Corporal Brennan saved 12 lives today, including mine. Her reasons for not disclosing her marksmanship abilities are understandable, and her performance under pressure was exemplary. I recommend commendation rather than discipline. Several team members nodded agreement, Whitlock among them. The cocky operator who had mocked her less than a day ago now looked at her with something approaching reverence. You could have let us die, he said quietly. We treated you like garbage, and you could have just watched it happen. Nobody would have blamed you. Finley shook her head. My father taught me that being a good shot is not about revenge or pride. It is about protecting the people who depend on you. even when those people do not realize they depend on you. Master Chief Kahale smiled slightly, the expression softening his weathered features. Jacob used to say something similar, that the best operators are the ones who do the right thing regardless of recognition or reward. Seems like that lesson stuck. Commander Vance walked back to the head of the table, her decision clearly made. Corporal Brennan, effective immediately, you are reassigned from communications to the sniper division pending formal qualification. Your actions today demonstrated capabilities that the teams need, and hiding those capabilities serves no one. She paused, her expression softening slightly. I understand wanting to escape your father's shadow, but you have proven today that you are not trying to be Jacob Brennan. You are Finley Brennan, and that is exactly who you need to be. Your father's legacy is not a burden to carry, it is a foundation to build upon. The words hit Finley with unexpected force, emotion tightening her throat. She had spent 3 years running from comparison, hiding her skills to avoid living in her father's shadow. But in the moment when it mattered most, when lives depended on those skills, she had discovered that honoring his legacy did not mean being him. It meant using what he taught her to protect others, to make the hard choices, to pull the trigger when necessary, and hold fire when wisdom demanded restraint. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of debriefings, medical evaluations, and formal statements. Intelligence analysts pored over every detail of the ambush, trying to understand how their assessment had been so catastrophically wrong. Enemy forces that sophisticated did not appear overnight, which meant someone had been watching and planning for weeks or months, waiting for exactly the kind of raid the SEAL team had attempted. Finley spent hours in the intelligence center, walking analysts through her observations from the ridge. She described the coordination of enemy movement, the professional discipline of their positioning, the way they had created overlapping fields of fire that would have been lethal if maintained. Her technical knowledge surprised the analysts, her ability to read terrain and predict tactical decisions marking her as someone who understood warfare at a deeper level than simple marksmanship. Commander Vance attended several of these sessions, listening carefully as Finley broke down the enemy strategy. The commander's respect was evident in how she asked questions, treating Finley as a peer rather than a junior enlisted member. When the sessions ended, Vance pulled Finley aside for a private conversation in her office. The small space was spartanly decorated, filled with operational maps and commendations that spoke to 2 decades of distinguished service. Vance gestured for Finley to sit, then poured 2 cups of coffee from a battered pot that looked older than both of them combined. She slid one across the desk and settled into her chair with the ease of someone comfortable with command. I knew your father, Vance said without preamble. Not well, but we crossed paths on several operations. He was the most naturally gifted shooter I ever encountered, but that was not what made him exceptional. What made Jacob Brennan legendary was his ability to see the entire battlefield, to understand how one shot could change the flow of combat 3 moves ahead. She paused, studying Finley over the rim of her coffee cup. You have that same gift. The way you prioritize targets during the ambush, eliminating the machine gunner first, even though the spotter was an easier shot, taking out the commander to create chaos in their command structure. Those were not instinctive reactions. Those were calculated decisions made under extreme pressure. My father used to make me play chess while describing tactical scenarios, Finley said quietly. He would set up positions and ask me which piece to move first, which target to eliminate to create maximum impact. I thought it was just a game until I was older and realized he was teaching me to think strategically about engagement. Vance nodded slowly. That is the difference between a good sniper and a great one. Anyone can be trained to shoot accurately. Teaching someone to think tactically, to understand the ripple effects of each decision, that is much harder. You demonstrated both skills simultaneously under conditions that would have broken most operators. She set down her coffee and leaned forward, her expression serious. I'm assigning you to formal sniper qualification starting next week, but I want you to understand what that means. You will be evaluated against the same standards as every other candidate. No special treatment, because of your father's reputation or what you did in that valley. Can you accept that? Finley met her gaze steadily. I would not want it any other way, ma'am. I did not want to advance because of who my father was. I want to earn my place based on my own capabilities. Good answer, Vance replied with a slight smile. But fair warning, the instructors are going to push you harder than other candidates precisely because you are Jacob Brennan's daughter. They will want to prove you are not just riding his legacy. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny? I have been preparing for it my entire life, Finley said simply. The conversation shifted to practical details, training schedules, and qualification standards, the technical requirements of becoming a formally designated sniper. But underneath the professional discussion, Finley felt something shifting in how she saw herself. For 3 years, she had hidden from her father's shadow, terrified of comparison and judgment. Now, she was walking deliberately into that shadow, choosing to embrace the legacy she had spent so long avoiding. When she left Vance's office, Master Chief Kahale was waiting in the corridor outside. His presence was not accidental, the veteran operator clearly having something to say. They walked together through the base in comfortable silence, the afternoon sun beating down on dusty buildings and equipment. Your father and I had a conversation once, Kahale said finally, his voice thoughtful. It was in Afghanistan, middle of a deployment that was grinding everyone down. We were sitting on Overwatch for 3 days straight, nothing but rocks and heat and waiting. He told me the hardest part about being a sniper was not the shooting, it was the knowing. Knowing you could kill someone from a mile away and they would never understand why. Knowing that one decision to pull the trigger would echo through families and communities in ways you could never fully comprehend. He paused, his weathered face lined with memories of decades of hard service. Jacob said the only way to carry that weight was to be absolutely certain every shot was necessary, that every life taken served a purpose larger than yourself. He said the day he started questioning that certainty was the day he would need to walk away from the rifle. Did he ever reach that day? Finley asked quietly. Kahale shook his head. He died before doubt could catch him, doing exactly what he was meant to do, protecting his team, making a hard shot when nobody else could, carrying the weight so others would not have to. That is his real legacy, Corporal Brennan. Not the number of kills or the impossible distances, but the willingness to carry that burden with honor and certainty. They reached the barracks area where temporary quarters had been assigned during the extended debriefing. Kahale stopped and turned to face her directly, his dark eyes serious. You carry that same burden now, whether you were the sniper designation formally or not. 18 shots, 15 kills, 12 lives saved. That weight is yours to carry forward. The question is whether you will carry it with the same honor and certainty your father did, or whether you will let doubt and fear control your decisions. Finley felt the truth of his words settling into her bones, understood that the moment she pulled the trigger on that ridge, she had crossed a threshold that could not be uncrossed. She was no longer Jacob Brennan's daughter, trying to escape his shadow. She was Finley Brennan, who had demonstrated capabilities that demanded responsibility. The skills her father had spent years teaching her were not meant to be hidden. They were meant to be used when lives hung in the balance. I understand, Master Chief, she said quietly, and I am ready to carry that weight. Kahale nodded, something like approval crossing his features. Your father would be proud, he said, not because you can shoot like him, but because you understand why the shooting matters. That is the lesson too many operators never learn. That technical skill without moral certainty is just murder dressed in camouflage. He turned to leave, then paused and looked back. One more thing, Corporal. When you go through formal qualification, they're going to try to break you. They will push until they find your limits, and then push harder. Do not let them make you doubt what you know to be true. You have already proven yourself under real combat conditions. Everything else is just paperwork and pride. The sniper qualification course began on a Monday morning that dawned cold and gray, the kind of weather that made every movement feel harder than it should. Finley reported to the range complex at 0500, her father's scope case secured to her pack, and her mind calm, despite knowing the next 6 weeks would test her in ways combat never had. The instructors would push until something broke. That was their job, and she would need to prove that what broke would not be her. Chief Instructor Roland Thatcher waited at the range office, a lean man in his mid-40s whose reputation preceded him like a shockwave. He had trained snipers for 15 years, had deployed to every major conflict in that time, and maintained standards so rigid that his graduation rate hovered around 30%. His eyes were cold as winter ice when he looked at Finley, taking in every detail with the practiced assessment of someone who had seen 1,000 candidates and knew which ones would wash out before they fired their first shot. "Corporal Brennan," he said, his voice flat and emotionless, "I have read the reports about your performance in the field. Impressive shooting under pressure, no question about that. But this course is not about one good day. This is about consistent performance across every condition, every range, every scenario we can create. Do you understand the difference?" "Yes, Chief," Finley replied, keeping her voice steady and her posture correct. Thatcher's expression did not change. "I also know who your father was. Jacob Brennan was one of the finest shooters ever to come through this program. That legacy means nothing here. You start from zero, just like every other candidate, and you will be evaluated on your performance, not your bloodline. Are we clear?" "Crystal clear, Chief." The other candidates numbered 7, all male, all with combat experience and formal shooting qualifications. They studied Finley with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility, clearly wondering what a communications specialist was doing in a course designed for elite operators. One of them, a staff sergeant named Garrett Voss, made no effort to hide his skepticism. "Heard you got lucky with a few shots in combat," Voss said during the equipment inspection, his tone carefully neutral, but his eyes challenging. "Lucky shots do not make you a sniper. This course will separate the real operators from the pretenders real fast." Finley said nothing, simply continued arranging her gear with methodical precision. Her father had taught her that responding to provocation was a waste of energy better spent on preparation. Let them doubt, let them challenge, let them assume whatever they wanted. The targets would tell the truth regardless of opinions. The first week was dedicated to fundamentals, the building blocks that separated adequate shooters from exceptional ones. Breathing control, trigger discipline, body positioning, reading wind and weather. Thatcher watched every candidate with hawk-like intensity, his corrections delivered in clipped sentences that left no room for argument or excuse. He pushed Finley no harder than the others, but offered no acknowledgement when she performed well, his face remaining impassive regardless of her results. By the end of the first week, 2 candidates had voluntarily withdrawn, unable to maintain the physical and mental demands of the course. The remaining 6 pushed forward, exhaustion becoming a constant companion as days stretched to 18 hours of shooting, physical training, and tactical instruction. Finley found herself falling back on lessons her father had drilled into her during childhood, muscle memory and mental discipline carrying her through moments when fatigue threatened to overwhelm concentration. The second week introduced advanced range work, shots that tested the absolute limits of rifle and scope capabilities. Targets at 1,200 meters, 1,400 meters, ranges where wind and elevation and temperature all combined to make each shot a complex calculation performed under time pressure. Voss struggled with the distances, his shots grouping inconsistently despite obvious technical skill. Another candidate washed out after failing to qualify on the 1,400-meter standard 3 times in a row. Finley shot consistently, her groups tight and her calculations precise. She could feel Thatcher watching her more closely now, his attention sharpening as she demonstrated capabilities that exceeded most of the other candidates. But he said nothing, offered no praise or recognition, simply marked her scores and moved to the next shooter. The third week brought field exercises, real-world scenarios that combined shooting with movement, camouflage, and tactical decision-making. Candidates were dropped into the wilderness with minimal supplies and ordered to reach observation points, establish hides, and engage targets while avoiding enemy patrols played by other instructors. Sleep deprivation and physical exhaustion compounded the challenge, testing not just shooting ability, but mental resilience under extended stress. Finley excelled in the field work. Her childhood spent on mountains and ranges with her father, giving her advantages the other candidates lacked. She moved through terrain with practiced efficiency, established shooting positions that were nearly invisible, and completed engagement scenarios with calm precision. Voss, despite his earlier confidence, struggled with the combination of physical demands and shooting accuracy, his performance declining as exhaustion accumulated. On the 18th day of the course, Thatcher called Finley to his office after a particularly grueling field exercise. She stood at attention in front of his desk, sweat drying on her uniform and fatigue making her muscles ache, while the chief instructor studied her qualification scores with unreadable expression. "You are performing at the top of your class," he said finally, his voice as flat as ever. "Your shooting is technically flawless, your fieldcraft is excellent, your tactical decision-making is sound. By every measurable standard, you are exceeding course requirements." He paused, and Finley felt the weight of what came next hanging in the air between them. "But I need to know something, Corporal Brennan," Thatcher continued, his cold eyes locking onto hers. "Are you here because you want to be a sniper, or because you think you owe it to your father's memory? Because if it is the latter, you need to walk away now. This job will destroy you if your heart is not fully committed to it." Finley met his gaze without flinching, finding her voice steady despite exhaustion and emotion. "I am here because 18 shots saved 12 lives, Chief. I am here because I have capabilities that can protect people who cannot protect themselves. My father gave me the skills, but the choice to use them is mine alone. I am not trying to be Jacob Brennan. I am trying to be the operator this team needs me to be." Thatcher studied her for a long moment, his expression revealing nothing. Then he nodded slowly. "Good answer," he said quietly, "because the hardest part of this job is not the shooting. It is living with the knowledge that your decisions determine who lives and who dies. Your father understood that burden. The question has been whether you understand it too." He stood and moved to the window, looking out at the range where candidates were still working through exercises. "Jacob Brennan was my instructor when I went through this course 20 years ago," he said, his voice carrying unexpected emotion. "He taught me that being a sniper is not about killing. It is about preventing death, taking one life to save many, making the hard choice so others do not have to carry that weight. He said the day you start enjoying the killing is the day you need to turn in your rifle and walk away." Thatcher turned back to face her. "You have your father's skills, Corporal Brennan, and from what I am seeing, you also have his judgment. That combination is rare and valuable. Do not waste it trying to prove something to people who do not matter. Just be the operator you are capable of being." The final qualification week arrived with a scenario designed to break even the strongest candidates. Chief Instructor Thatcher briefed the remaining 5 shooters in the pre-dawn darkness, his face illuminated by the harsh glow of tactical maps spread across the briefing table. The exercise would simulate a hostage rescue situation, multiple targets at varying ranges under time pressure, with the added complexity of distinguishing hostile forces from civilians in a chaotic environment. The impossible shot, Thatcher called it, his voice carrying the weight of countless candidates who had failed this exact test. 1,800 meters, target partially obscured by environmental factors, wind conditions deliberately adverse, and a 2-inch margin for error. Miss by even a fraction and you hit a simulated hostage. Hesitate too long and the hostage dies anyway. This shot separates those who can perform under perfect conditions from those who can deliver when everything is wrong. He looked directly at Finley as he spoke, and she understood this was the moment he had been building toward since the course began. This was not just about technical skill anymore. This was about demonstrating the judgment and certainty her father had been legendary for. The ability to make an impossible shot when lives hung in the balance, and failure meant consequences too terrible to contemplate. The candidates moved to their assigned positions as dawn broke across the mountain range, each finding their hide and establishing their shooting platform. Finley settled into a rocky outcrop that offered minimal protection from the wind cutting across the ridge. Her father's scope mounted and zeroed, her breathing controlled despite adrenaline singing through her veins. Below and impossibly far away, she could see the target range laid out like a miniature battlefield. Through her scope, Finley studied the scenario with methodical precision. The primary target was a human silhouette positioned behind a barrier at 1,800 meters, partially obscured by a gap barely wide enough for a bullet to pass through. On either side were hostage silhouettes, positioned close enough that any miscalculation would result in hitting an innocent rather than the intended target. The wind was gusting and unpredictable, shifting direction every few seconds, temperature gradients creating mirage effects that distorted the sight picture. Candidates, you have 10 minutes to complete the qualification. Thatcher's voice came through their radios. Clock starts now. Finley heard the other shooters beginning their engagement sequences, the distant crack of rifles echoing across the valley as they worked through the preliminary targets. She ignored them, focusing entirely on her own calculations and observations. The wind was the primary variable, gusting between 8 and 15 kilometers per hour for varying angles. She needed to time her shot for a lull in the wind while accounting for the bullet's flight time over 1,800 meters. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, patient instruction delivered on a Colorado mountainside when she was barely tall enough to hold a rifle steady. The wind tells you when to shoot, Finley girl. You do not fight it. You wait for it to give you permission. Learn to feel the rhythm, the pattern and the chaos, and take your shot when the moment arrives. She watched the wind indicators, small flags positioned at intervals down the range, studying their movement and searching for the pattern. They are a rhythm emerging from the seeming randomness, a brief window every 40 to 50 seconds when the wind dropped to its lowest velocity. That was her moment. That was when the shot would be possible. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. Finley heard shots from other positions, heard Thatcher's voice calling out results over the radio. Voss had missed completely, his bullet striking 3 inches left of the intended target. Another candidate had hit a hostage silhouette, automatic failure. The pressure was building, time running out, but Finley kept her breathing steady and waited for the wind to give her permission. 30 seconds remaining, Thatcher announced, his voice emotionless. Finley felt the wind drop, felt the momentary stillness that preceded the next gust. Her body settled into perfect stillness, the rifle becoming an extension of her skeleton rather than something held in her hands. The crosshairs centered on the tiny gap where the target was visible, accounting for bullet drop over distance, for the Coriolis effect at this range, for every variable her father had drilled into her consciousness over years of training. The pause between heartbeats arrived, that perfect moment of absolute stillness where the body ceased its tiny movements and became as stable as the earth itself. Finley squeezed the trigger with pressure so gradual it surprised even her when the rifle fired, the recoil familiar as breathing, the scope coming back down to show the target still standing in the exact same position. Time, Thatcher called out. All candidates cease fire and await scoring. The wait was excruciating, minutes stretching into what felt like hours as range personnel moved downrange to score the targets. Finley remained in position, her rifle secure and her mind replaying the shot in perfect detail. She had done everything right, had executed exactly as trained, but at 1,800 meters with adverse conditions there was always room for variables beyond human control. Candidate Brennan. Thatcher's voice finally came through the radio. Center mass hit, target neutralized, no collateral damage. Qualification complete with honors. The relief that washed over Finley was profound but short-lived, replaced immediately by the weight of what that shot represented. She had proven her technical capabilities beyond any doubt, had demonstrated that her performance in combat was not luck or accident, but the result of skills honed to a razor edge. But more importantly, she had proven her judgment, her ability to wait for the right moment rather than forcing a shot that was not ready. The candidates gathered at the range office for final scoring and evaluation. Of the 5 who had attempted the final qualification, only Finley and one other candidate had successfully completed it. Voss stood apart from the group, his face a mask of frustrated anger, clearly struggling with the reality that the communications specialist he had dismissed had outperformed him at every stage. Chief Instructor Thatcher stood before them, his expression as cold and unreadable as it had been on the first day. "Corporal Brennan, Staff Sergeant Reeves, you have successfully completed the Advanced Sniper Qualification course. Your performance met or exceeded standards in every category, and your final qualification shots demonstrated the judgment and technical skill required of elite operators." He paused, his gaze settling on Finley with something that might have been approval. "Corporal Brennan, your qualification score is the highest recorded in this course in 7 years. Your field craft, tactical decision-making, and shooting ability place you in the top percentile of graduates. You have earned your designation through demonstrated competence, not legacy or reputation." Thatcher stepped forward and held out a patch, the sniper qualification badge that represented 6 weeks of brutal evaluation and a lifetime of preparation. Finley took it with hands that remained steady despite emotion, threatening to overwhelm her composure. This was not her father's achievement. This was hers alone, earned through her own choices and capabilities. "Your father would be proud," Thatcher said quietly, his voice carrying undertones of genuine respect. "Not because you can shoot like him, but because you understand what the shooting means. That distinction is what makes you dangerous in the best possible way." The ceremony concluded with formal documentation and administrative details, but Finley barely registered any of it. She stood outside the range office afterward, the qualification patch heavy in her hand, and felt the weight of her father's legacy finally settling into something she could carry with pride rather than burden. She was not Jacob Brennan's daughter pretending to be a sniper. She was Sniper Finley Brennan, who had earned her place through blood, sweat, and 1,800-meter shots that defied probability. The formal recognition ceremony took place 3 days after qualification, giving Finley just enough time to process what she had accomplished before facing the assembled unit. Commander Vance had organized the event in the main briefing hall, a space large enough to accommodate the forward operating base's entire SEAL contingent. The room filled with operators who had heard the stories, who knew about the ambush and the impossible shots, who wanted to see the communications specialist turned sniper receive official acknowledgement. Lieutenant Garrison stood near the front with the rest of his team, his expression carrying none of the dismissiveness that had characterized their first meeting. Staff Sergeant Holbrook was there, back from medical leave with her arm still in a sling, but her smile genuine. Petty Officer Whitlock had positioned himself where he could see everything, his cocky demeanor replaced by something closer to humble respect. Master Chief Kahale occupied his usual position at the back of the room, his weathered face showing quiet satisfaction. Commander Vance called the assembly to attention with crisp authority, her voice carrying to every corner of the packed hall. "We are here to recognize exceptional performance under combat conditions," she began, her tone formal but warm. "To acknowledge courage, skill, and the kind of judgment that separates adequate operators from exceptional ones." She gestured for Finley to join her at the front of the room. Finley walked forward with measured steps, her dress uniform feeling strange after weeks in field gear. Her father's scope case secured at her side because she could not imagine being here without it. The assembled operators watched in silence, their attention absolute. On the morning of October 15th, Vance continued, "A SEAL team conducting a direct action raid encountered a sophisticated ambush that should have resulted in total loss of personnel. Intelligence had failed to identify enemy strength and positioning, leaving our operators exposed in a kill zone with no support and no viable extraction options. By all tactical assessments, that team should not have survived." The room was utterly silent now, every operator understanding the gravity of what Vance was describing. These were professionals who had trained for worst-case scenarios, who understood exactly how quickly missions could spiral from controlled operations to catastrophic failures. Corporal Finley Brennan, serving in a communications specialist role, was positioned on overwatch approximately 1,200 to 1,800 meters from the engagement zone, Vance said, her eyes finding Finley's. Despite having no formal sniper designation and no orders to engage, Corporal Brennan made the tactical decision to provide precision fire support. Over the course of 18 minutes, she fired 18 shots, scoring 15 confirmed kills at extreme range under adverse conditions. Vance paused, letting the statistics sink in. The assembled operators shifted, murmurs of appreciation and disbelief rippling through the crowd. 18 shots, 15 kills at those ranges represented shooting that most of them could not replicate even under ideal conditions. Her target selection demonstrated tactical acumen that exceeded her experience level, Vance continued. She prioritized threats based on their impact to overall enemy capabilities rather than ease of engagement. She neutralized the machine gun position that was creating the most immediate danger, eliminated spotters and commanders to disrupt enemy coordination, and systematically degraded their ability to maintain the ambush. Her actions directly resulted in the survival of 12 operators who would otherwise have been killed or captured. Commander Vance picked up a formal commendation from the table beside her, the Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal with Combat Distinguishing Device. For exceptional courage, superior tactical judgment, and demonstrated marksmanship abilities that exceeded all reasonable expectations, it is my honor to present Corporal Finley Brennan with this recognition of her exemplary service. She pinned the medal to Finley's uniform with practiced precision, then stepped back and rendered a formal salute that Finley returned with equal formality. The assembled operators erupted into applause, the sound filling the hall and echoing off the walls. These were not people who gave recognition easily, who understood that survival in combat often came down to split-second decisions and exceptional skill. They were acknowledging one of their own. Additionally, Vance said, raising her voice over the applause, Corporal Brennan has successfully completed advanced sniper qualification, achieving the highest scores recorded in that course in 7 years. Effective immediately, she is designated as a qualified sniper and reassigned to sniper operations. Her formal rank advancement to sergeant will be processed through appropriate channels. More applause, louder this time, mixed with voices calling out congratulations and approval. Finley stood at attention, emotion threatening to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. This was recognition she had never sought, acknowledgement of abilities she had spent years hiding, but standing here, surrounded by operators who understood what her actions meant, felt like finally coming home to a place she had always belonged. Lieutenant Garrison stepped forward, his movement drawing attention and silencing the crowd. He came to attention in front of Finley, his expression serious, but no longer carrying any trace of the skepticism that had defined their early interactions. Sergeant Brennan, he said, using her new rank deliberately. On behalf of my team, I want to formally apologize for how we treated you before that mission. We judged you based on assumptions rather than capabilities, dismissed you based on your designation rather than your skills. You saved our lives despite having every reason to let us face the consequences of our own arrogance. His voice carried clearly through the silent hall, each word weighted with genuine remorse. You demonstrated not just exceptional shooting, but exceptional character. Any operator can be trained to hit targets. Learning when to take the shot, understanding the moral weight of those decisions that cannot be taught. You have both the skill and the judgment, and I would be honored to serve with you on future operations. He extended his hand, and Finley shook it firmly. The gesture was more than reconciliation. It was acknowledgement from a respected team leader that she had earned her place among elite operators through demonstrated competence under the worst possible conditions. Other team members came forward after Garrison, each offering their own words of respect and gratitude. Whitlock's apology was particularly earnest, the cocky operator clearly humbled by how wrong his initial assessment had been. Holbrook hugged her despite her injured arm, whispering thanks for saving her life. One by one, operators who had been strangers or skeptics became brothers and sisters in arms, united by shared experience and mutual respect. Master Chief Kahale was the last to approach, his massive presence somehow gentle as he stood before her. "Your father served with honor and distinction for 20 years," he said quietly, his voice meant only for her. "He built a legacy based on skill, judgment, and unwavering commitment to protecting his team. Today you proved that legacy is not about living in someone's shadow. It is about carrying forward the values they embodied while being true to yourself." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn challenge coin. The metal darkened with age and handling. "Jacob gave this to me after a mission in Helmand Province. Said it was for keeping him honest when he needed it most. I have carried it through 3 more deployments, waiting for the right moment to pass it forward. I think that moment is now." Finley took the coin with trembling hands, feeling the weight of decades of service and sacrifice compressed into a small piece of metal. One side showed the sealed trident, the other was engraved with words she recognized as her father's personal motto: "Protect those who cannot protect themselves." "That is the real mission, Sergeant Brennan," Kahale said softly. "Not the killing, not the glory, just the simple act of standing between the innocent and the threat. Your father understood that. Now you understand it too. That makes you truly dangerous and truly valuable." The ceremony concluded with final administrative details and informal congratulations, but Finley barely processed any of it. She stood holding her father's challenge coin and wearing her earned qualifications, finally understanding that honoring his legacy did not mean becoming him. It meant taking the skills he had taught her and using them with the same judgment, the same moral certainty, the same commitment to protecting others that had defined his service. 3 weeks after the ceremony, Sergeant Finley Brennan found herself back on a helicopter heading toward hostile territory. But this time, everything was different. She sat with Lieutenant Garrison's team, not as an outsider forced upon them by command, but as their designated sniper, a role she had earned through blood and impossible shots. The operators around her checked their weapons with practiced efficiency. Their body language relaxed despite the danger ahead. And when they looked at her, it was with the easy confidence of teammates who trusted each other with their lives. The mission was another direct action raid, this time with intelligence that had been thoroughly vetted after the lessons learned from the ambush. But command was taking no chances, which was why Finley had spent the last 2 days studying aerial reconnaissance and building a detailed understanding of every approach, every sight line, every position where enemy forces might establish an ambush. Her role was not just to provide overwatch, but to be the team's eyes on the entire battlefield, to see threats before they materialized and eliminate them before they became critical. Garrison moved through the helicopter and settled into the seat beside her, his tactical vest loaded with the tools of their profession. "How are you feeling about the insertion?" he asked, his tone carrying genuine interest rather than the skeptical challenge of their first mission together. "Confident, sir," Finley replied, her voice steady. "The terrain favors overwatch positions, and the weather conditions are optimal for long-range shooting. If there are threats out there, I will find them." He nodded, studying her face in the red interior lighting. "You know the team calls you Phantom now," he said with a slight smile. "Because you appear out of nowhere on their scopes, take impossible shots, and disappear before anyone can locate your position." Whitlock started it, but the name stuck. Finley felt a smile tugging at her lips despite the pre-mission tension. "Better than some of the things they used to call me," she said quietly. Garrison's expression grew more serious. "I meant what I said at the ceremony, Sergeant. We failed you before, judged you on surface factors rather than capabilities. That kind of thinking gets people killed, and we're damn lucky your character exceeded our stupidity. The team knows that now, and it has changed how we approach every mission. We look deeper, we question our assumptions, we recognize that excellence comes in forms we might not expect." The helicopter began its descent toward the landing zone, the pilot's voice crackling through their headsets with final approach warnings. The team moved with synchronized precision, checking weapons and equipment one final time before boots would hit ground. Finley secured her rifle, her father's scope mounted and ready, and felt the familiar calm settling over her like a protective cloak. They inserted without incident, the team flowing into tactical formation and moving toward their objective with practiced silence. Finley split off toward her assigned Overwatch position, accompanied by Master Chief Kahale, who had volunteered for security on her climb. They moved through the darkness together, two professionals who understood each other without needing constant communication. The rich position was everything she had hoped for, elevation and clear sight lines combining with natural cover to create the perfect sniper nest. Finley established her shooting platform, while Kahale set up security, his presence reassuring even though she knew he would move to his own position once she was settled. Before he left, Kahale paused beside her position. "Your father and I used to joke that the best missions were the boring ones," he said quietly. "The ones where the sniper never had to fire because their presence alone changed enemy calculations. I hope this is one of those missions, Sergeant Brennan." "So do I, Master Chief," Finley replied, settling behind her scope. He disappeared into the darkness, leaving her alone with her rifle and her thoughts. Through the scope, she could see the objective, could track her team's careful approach, could scan surrounding terrain for threats that intelligence might have missed. The night was clear and cold, stars wheeling overhead in patterns her father had taught her to read for navigation when compasses failed and technology betrayed. The mission unfolded with textbook precision, the assault element reaching the objective without contact and beginning their clearance procedures. Finley maintained Overwatch, her scope methodically scanning sectors, her mind processing hundreds of small details that together painted a picture of the tactical environment. No enemy forces, no ambushes, no threats materializing from the shadows. Just a professional operation executed by skilled operators who trusted each other completely. 2 hours later, the team extracted with their objectives accomplished and zero casualties. The helicopters lifting off into the night sky with the satisfaction of a mission completed successfully. Finley sat in the helicopter beside her teammates, feeling the weight of responsibility that came with her role, but also the profound satisfaction of protecting those who depended on her vigilance. Back at the forward operating base, the team gathered for the informal debrief that always followed successful missions. They sat in the team room with coffee and exhaustion, discussing what went right and what could be improved, the easy camaraderie of professionals who had survived another night in the dark places of the world. "Phantom kept us safe out there," Whitlock said, using her new call sign naturally. "Knowing she had eyes on the whole battlefield, let us focus on our jobs without constantly worrying about ambushes. That is what good Overwatch does," Garrison added, looking at Finley with approval. "Changes the entire team's confidence level when you know someone that's skilled is watching your back." Staff Sergeant Holbrook raised her coffee cup in a mock toast. "To Phantom," she said with a grin. "May her shots always fly true and her coffee always stay hot." The team joined the toast, their voices mixing with laughter and relief. Finley sat among them, finally feeling like she belonged, not because of her father's legacy, but because of her own proven capabilities. She had walked into a shadow, faced it directly, and emerged as her own person with her own identity earned through skill and judgment and the willingness to pull the trigger when lives depended on it. Later, alone in her quarters, Finley cleaned her rifle with the meditative focus her father had taught her was essential to the craft. She opened his scope case and studied the Schmidt and Bender glass, seeing not just precision optics, but a connection across time to a man who had understood the weight of this responsibility. The challenge coin from Master Chief Kahale sat on her desk, its message clear and uncompromising. Protect those who cannot protect themselves. That was the mission, she realized, the true purpose beneath all the training and qualifications in combat operations. Not to be the best shooter or the most feared sniper, but to stand between the innocent and the threat, to use her skills with wisdom and certainty, to carry the burden so others would not have to. She thought about the ambush, about the moment when she had to choose between hiding and acting, about the 18 shots that had saved 12 lives. That choice had transformed everything, had forced her to stop running from her father's legacy and instead embrace the values he had embodied. But the transformation was not about becoming Jacob Brennan. It was about becoming Finley Brennan, who happened to shoot like her father, but thought and chose and served according to her own character. If this story moved you, she thought, imagining all the people who would never know about these missions or understand what happened in the dark places. Share your thoughts about your favorite moment, or if you have ever known someone who revealed hidden strength when it mattered most. The military families who understood sacrifice, the communities that supported their warriors, the quiet heroes who did extraordinary things without seeking recognition. Finley returned the scope to its case and secured her equipment for the next mission, whenever it might come. She was ready now, fully committed to the path she had chosen, understanding that her father's legacy was not a shadow to escape, but a foundation to build upon. She was Sergeant Finley Brennan, designated sniper, protector of those who could not protect themselves, and she would carry the responsibility with the same honor and certainty that had defined Jacob Brennan's service. The weight was heavy, but she was strong enough to carry it. And she would never be alone in that burden, because she had finally found her place among warriors who understood what the shooting really meant. The descent from the ridge felt surreal, each careful step taking Finley closer to a reckoning she had spent 3 years avoiding. Her communications pack bounced against her spine with familiar weight, but everything else had changed in the span of 18 minutes and 18 shots. She was no longer the specialist they could dismiss, no longer the outsider forced upon the team by command decisions beyond their control. She was the sniper who had saved their lives, and there would be no hiding from that reality. The SEAL team had consolidated their position in a defensive perimeter, weapons pointed outward, while medics worked on the wounded with steady hands. The sound of approaching helicopters grew louder, the distinctive beat of rotors promising extraction and safety. But extraction meant debriefing, meant explanations, meant facing the questions that would strip away every careful layer of anonymity she had built around herself. Finley reached the valley floor and moved toward the team's position, her rifle slung across her chest and her father's scope case secure at her side. She could feel their eyes tracking her movement, could sense the shift in attention as operators who had been focused on security and casualties turned to watch her approach. The weight of their stares was heavier than any equipment she carried. Staff Sergeant Holbrook saw her first, the medic looking up from bandaging a wounded operator's leg. Her expression cycled through confusion, realization, and something close to awe in the span of seconds. "You," she said simply, her voice carrying across the defensive position. "It was you up there." Other team members turned at Holbrook's words, their faces showing similar progression of understanding. These were elite operators trained to read situations and connect tactical dots, and the evidence was overwhelming. The shots had come from Finley's position on the northern ridge, precision fire at ranges that required world-class marksmanship, systematic target selection that demonstrated tactical genius. There was no other explanation that made sense. Petty Officer Whitlock pushed himself up from his defensive position, favoring his shrapnel-wounded leg, but moving with determined purpose. He stopped 3 meters from Finley, his expression stripped of its usual cockiness and replaced with raw honesty. "I owe you my life," he said quietly. "We all do. Those shots were impossible, Brennan. Impossible distances, impossible conditions, but you made them anyway." "Not impossible," Finley replied, her voice steady despite emotion threatening to break through. "Just difficult. My father taught me that impossible is usually just another word for unprepared." Master Chief Kahale had moved to stand near Lieutenant Garrison, and Finley saw the veteran operator speaking quietly to the team leader. Garrison's expression shifted as he listened, his tactical mind clearly working through implications and connections. When Kahale finished speaking, Garrison looked at Finley with new eyes, seeing not the burden forced upon his team, but the asset that had prevented catastrophic failure. The helicopters were close now, their approach marking the end of this mission and the beginning of whatever came next. Finley knew the questions would come, knew she would need to explain everything she had hidden for 3 years. But standing here among operators whose lives she had saved, she felt something unexpected. Not fear or regret, but a strange sense of relief, like a weight she had been carrying had finally been set down. One of the wounded operators, a young petty officer whose name Finley barely knew, called out from where medics had him stabilized for transport. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice weak but sincere. "My daughter gets to see me again because of you." The words hit Finley harder than she expected, driving home the reality of what her 18 shots had actually meant. Not abstract tactical success or professional achievement, but fathers going home to daughters, husbands to wives, sons to mothers. Real people with real lives that would have ended in this valley if she had chosen to remain hidden. Lieutenant Garrison approached as the helicopters touched down, dust and debris swirling in their rotor wash. "We need to talk when we get back to base," he said, his voice carrying none of its earlier dismissiveness. "A lot of people are going to have questions about what happened here, and you're going to be at the center of those conversations." "I understand, sir," Finley replied. Garrison studied her for a moment, his expression difficult to read. "For what it is worth, Brennan, I was wrong about you. We all were. That kind of shooting does not come from luck or accident. It comes from years of training and natural talent combined. Wherever you learn to shoot like that, whatever made you hide those skills, it does not matter now. What matters is that you made the hard choice when it counted." The team loaded into the helicopters with practiced efficiency, wounded first, and then security positions collapsing inward as everyone found their places. Finley took a seat near the door, her rifle between her knees and her thoughts racing ahead to what came next. The ceremony, the questions, the inevitable comparisons to her father that she had spent so long trying to avoid. But as the helicopter lifted off and the valley fell away beneath them, Finley realized something fundamental had shifted inside her. She had stopped running. For 3 years, she had hidden her abilities, had chosen anonymity over recognition, had built a career around being unremarkable. But in the moment when hiding meant watching her team die, she had made a different choice. She had picked up her father's scope, taken the shots that needed taking, and accepted the consequences of revealing who she really was. Master Chief Kahale's earlier words echoed in her memory. "The hardest shot is not the one you take, it is the one you choose not to take." She understood now what he had meant, understood that her father's real lesson was not about marksmanship, but about moral courage, about knowing when action was required regardless of personal cost, about accepting responsibility even when it meant exposing yourself to judgment and comparison. The forward operating base came into view, a collection of buildings and defensive positions that represented temporary safety in a hostile world. The helicopters descended toward the landing pads, medics already waiting to receive the wounded. This mission was ending, but Finley knew her real test was just beginning. The questions would come, the scrutiny would intensify, and she would need to explain not just how she could shoot, but why she had hidden it for so long. Looking around the helicopter at the faces of operators she had saved, Finley felt a certainty settling into her bones. Whatever came next, whatever questions or challenges or comparisons awaited her, she had made the right choice. 18 shots had saved 12 lives, and no amount of discomfort or scrutiny could diminish that fundamental truth. Her father had taught her to shoot, but the decision to use those skills when it mattered most, that had been hers alone. The helicopter touched down, and the team began unloading, moving with the controlled urgency of professionals transitioning from mission mode to base operations. Finley gathered her equipment and prepared to face whatever came next, knowing that the communications specialist who had boarded this helicopter before the mission no longer existed. In her place was someone different, someone who had been forged in the crucible of impossible shots and life or death decisions. She was still Jacob Brennan's daughter, still carried his legacy and his scope and his lessons. But she was also Finley Brennan, who had made choices under pressure that proved she was more than just a reflection of her father's legend. She had her own story now, written in precision shots and save lives, and whatever judgment awaited her would need to reckon with that reality.